No mai haere mai ki quite simply politics. Welcome everyone. Welcome to another episode. I have got a really awesome guest for everyone today, and you will probably not know this, but he was my boss for 2 years, so he had to put up with me for 2 years. So welcome to the podcast, the Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Great to be here. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you so much. Now, we were chatting just before we came live, and you are the third male guest that we've had on this podcast.
Lucky me.
Talk to me about your experience on the campaign trail so far.
Well, we're in the Epsom electorate, obviously, and so it's a unique electorate in some respects. It's a very strong National Party electorate, but we also have David Seymour in the ACT Party and Camilla Bellich as a sitting MP. So there's 3 sitting MPs and a collection of others. Yeah. We've had a few debates already. They've all gone. We haven't had to call the police or anything like that. It's gone relatively well so far, and there's plenty of interest. We put the hoarding signs up. Quite a few were knocked over yesterday, so it's pretty standard sort of stuff.
So you've already had hoardings knocked over, and they've been up for what, about 48 hours?
Yes, yeah. Yep.
Anywhere in particular?
Down the bottom of Shore Road, very dangerous territory, bottom of Remuera there.
Is that the ACT Party faithfuls coming out and saying...
Well, the Labour signs came under a bit of fire as well, so yeah, it might have been a third party involved, who knows? I wouldn't like to name names.
So when we also you were part of a event last week, Point of Order debate series.
Yes.
Now,
a very well organised evening, I'm about to say.
Really?
Yeah.
Who organised it?
I don't know. I think you might have had some involvement.
Now, one of the things that we did at that event was a fundraiser.
Yes.
Now, for my sins, perhaps.
Yes.
I bid on a very important piece of literature.
You did.
Which I would like you to talk our listeners through.
Right, okay.
Which is this amazing book here. It says, "We won, you lost, eat that."
Yes.
Now, you wrote this.
I did.
Talk us through this experience of writing a book.
Yes, I will. I will also make the point that all the MPs brought along an auction item.
Yes.
And funnily enough, that one was the one that achieved the highest price, significantly higher than David Seymour's one, which was only got a small amount for a T-shirt. So anyway, that's by the by. I wrote that book.
Is that playing out market forces there?
Yeah, market forces. I wrote that way back, 2009, I think it was, before I got involved in politics, and it's a history of the politics of tax. Mm. So people freak out when they look at tax and think it's all about the intricacies of tax, but it's more about, because I don't know, half of politics is about taking money off some people and giving it to other people, or spending it on X, Y, and Z, and so who you take it from, how you take it, and who you give it to, and what you spend it on is the meat and drink of politics. And so it was kind of looking at the story, and if you look at New Zealand history generally, most of the history's been written by lefty academics, and it's all about the wonderful things that governments have done, the wonderful things that the state has done, but they very seldom ask the question, where did they get the money from in order to do it? And so that's what I set out to write about in that book, which I quite enjoyed.
What was the process of writing a book? Like, what does it actually entail?
Well, sitting in front of a computer.
Yeah.
Well, first I had to, basically I had to find a bunch of people who were prepared to support me. It took about a year to write it, and so I got a bunch of sponsors basically lined up who funded me for a year to do it. And it came about, actually, the idea behind it, before I'd written a book on a very prominent business family, the Myers. Douglas Myers used to own or control Lion Nathan,
right.
And his family had been sort of quite prominent in business for about 4 generations since they came out from what is now Poland as early Jewish migrants. And what struck me as interesting in that story was the variation over the generations in response to their entrepreneurialism and so forth. And when you looked at it, of course, the early generations paid no tax, and then the middle generations were paying literally 70% company tax during World War II and in the 50s, and then the later ones were back down to 33. And so the impact of tax on people's attitude towards entrepreneurialism is very profound, and that's what sort of inspired me to fill the gap.
What do you think about the settings right now for tax?
Well, it's always every government should be trying to ensure that we're competitive and that it makes sense internationally. I mean, what the current government's doing with the GST of fruit and vegetables is the kind of thing that nobody sensible has done for 50 years since it was been introduced, because we have this wonderful system which is clean and simple. And they're mucking around with it, so you can save everybody $5 a week by taking it off fresh fruit and vegetables and frozen ones. But then, why not nappies? Why not? Why not a whole bunch of things? Why not books? Why not daycare? And so the moment you take it off one group, well, then eventually the logic doesn't stand up, and so you end up taking it off a bunch of other things, and the next minute you don't have the revenue, and so you've got to have higher interest, higher income tax, and which is where we were back in the early 80s, where people were paying 66% income tax rates, and nobody does that voluntarily, and so the whole system falls over because everybody's trying to cheat it, because nobody voluntarily pays 2/3 of their income in tax, and so it just doesn't work.
So what do you think should be done differently? Because I note that of all of the members of parliament, especially all of those in your caucus, you were the only opposition MP's name who was used by Labour Party during their tax announcement.
Oh, really? What did they say? So... I didn't listen to it.
Well, I did.
I was out door knocking. I was talking to the people on the street.
So it was the finance minister just referenced something about your I can't remember, it was some reference to your tax proposals of the 2020 election or something like that. It was just but I noticed that your name specifically came up, and I thought, great, he's going to be on the podcast, let me ask him about that.
Yeah, and I didn't listen.
Okay.
Old Robbo was poor old Grant Robertson is not quite the man he used to be when it comes to but they seem to have lost their way, is how I would describe it.
Yeah.
He's been on the record for years saying this is a stupid idea, and now he's trying to sort of pretend that he no longer thinks it's a stupid idea, which is pretty thin. You got David Parker, who's stomped off. He used to be the Inland Revenue spokesperson. He's left because he wanted a wealth tax. Yeah. So the whole thing is kind of a mess, and so you got the Prime Minister veering off, but which is I think just a general reflection on the pressure that they're facing when you've been in government for 6 years, and ultimately you don't really have much to show for your efforts. On the basics, we're in recession, we've got inflation, house prices are out of control still. You made no progress on housing affordability. The law and order situation's a mess, education's a mess, health's a mess. Then the pressure starts to build up, and people start to feel a little bit. They start moving around, trying all sorts of sort of gimmicks, but ultimately they're in strife. So it's terrible to see.
So what do you think, you're a spokesperson for justice?
Yep. What
do you think would be the key changes that should be happening right now in terms of correcting some of the stuff that you're seeing happening across the justice sector?
On the sort of law and order side, the first thing is to change the overall direction. So they haven't been a very good government when it comes to targets and setting clear expectations of the public sector. And in the justice system, the only clear target that they've got is to reduce the prison population by 30%, which, everybody wants to see fewer people in prison, but it's got to reflect what's going on in the community. And so they're just reducing it regardless. But you've also had a 33% increase in violent crime, and 100% increase in retail crime, and ram raids are through the roof. And so that's not the right focus. The focus should be on reducing the number of victims of crime. That's what the justice policy should be focused on. So that's the starting point, is sending a clear direction to the whole system, which filters its way through that we're interested in public safety and reducing the number of victims. And then I kind of got three areas that we'll be focusing on. One is dealing more effectively with the violent crime, which we're talking about that direction. Also restricting the ability of judges to massively reduce sentences, give the police the powers they need to deal with gangs. Secondly, around youth crime, which we can go into the detail, we've got to have some consequences for youth crime. At the moment, it's too much of a free pass. And then third, it's about speeding up the process of the courts, where people's lives are on hold for years. And so they are the three big areas around sort of the law and order side. Then my fourth priority, if I was minister tomorrow, would be on the electoral side, which is also around restoring equal voting rights, and we can talk about that at the local government level, where the government has never talked about it much, but they're undermining the principle of equal voting rights at local government level, and we want to restore those.
Do you feel there's an element of something quite cyclical about this? Because I remember when I started my first job out of law school, which was at Manukau District Court, one of the key focuses, that was in 2012, was getting the number, like the days that the cases were sitting, reducing it down. That was in 2012. We're now in 2023.
It's blown out again. It's like it requires constant effort. And the moment you take your eye off the ball, and you have all these different priorities, and Chris Farfoy was a justice minister, and it's all about banning hate speech and reducing the voting age to 16 and banning gay conversion therapy, all things that might be of interest, and arguable points, but the point is you first got to do the basics, and one of the most basic things in justice is ensuring that the court system is fast and efficient, and it's got worse and worse and worse. And so when people's lives are on hold for years, like I say, not just in the criminal side, but also, heaven forbid, if you end up in the family court, that takes forever. And if somebody steals some money off your business, well, you might as, if it's 100,000, it's just not worth it. The whole process is too slow. So, and there's like 20 things that you've got to do to start improving it. It's not just it's not simple, but the only point I'd make is that it needs to be one of the absolute priorities of a minister and a ministry to focus on it, rather than just one of 10 things, including all sorts of things which the Young Labour Party want to get done. And so that's why you got to have a focus and prioritise.
When was the last time that you went to a court?
Well, I've been to several of them over the course of this year, a couple of months, I suppose. I went to, so I've been to Auckland, down to Invercargill, and all over the place. It's pretty amazing. Amazing place. Gisborne, that was quite interesting. I had a bottle of wine in my case that I'd been given from the night before, and went through the security and total chaos.
Ran. So, what were the takeaways for you on the front line versus this idea of creating policy?
Well, every time I've been to the courts, they've been kind of quiet, and it fluctuates during the week. I think Monday morning is the time to go when you want to see chaos, and by Friday it's kind of empty, and so it's a strange sort of system, and it's not necessarily designed in the most efficient way. And so there's huge gains to be made from use of AV and Zoom effectively. Not for everything, but there's a whole swathe of things that can be done that way. But at the moment, some judges like it, some don't. And some say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that." Well, sorry, sorry, you need to, because we've got to get the system working effectively, and it's so. But it's full of people who very passionate and committed people, from the defence lawyers through to the court workers, through to the security, to the judges, people who want to make a difference and to get things sorted, and so we just want to help them to get that done.
Because one of the things that was most interesting during my time that I worked for you was definitely paying attention to policy, right? And it was thinking about the decisions that you're making in that beehive-shaped building and how that's actually going to play out in the real world.
Yep.
The reason why this is important for me is that prior to moving across the road to work in Parliament, I worked at the Justice Centre. And in the criminal justice team, they were writing policy for courts. And one of the questions I asked was, how many of you have been to a courtroom? And there were none of them.
Yeah, well.
So one of the things I wonder, and I want to know your view on this, is do you think that sometimes policy is treated as too esoteric to what is actually happening on the ground?
Yeah. I mean, it could always. I mean, the process of passing laws, where it's introduced after a whole. I mean, in the ideal world, you have a whole lot of consultation with the sector. In the broadest sense, before you actually introduce a bill, and then it goes off to the select committee, and everybody gets to comment on it, and then it's improved, and then finally passed.
Yeah.
What we've seen, and previous national governments have been guilty of this as well, but governments are in a hurry, and so they rush things through, and that process doesn't work as well as it could. And the other sort of issue in the justice sector is, the evidence is pretty patchy. So the classic example is around the 3 strikes legislation, which we introduced, which is tougher penalties for the worst repeat offenders. So it's not for minor criminals or people who've smoked a bit of cannabis or something like that. It's serious, violent, and sexual criminals. Now the government sort of repealed it, and they said, well, the evidence is it doesn't work. And then we asked, well, what is this evidence? And after a long period of time, they eventually, the Ministry of Justice came back and said, well, there is no evidence either way. We don't know. Got no idea. And you would think that they would. You would think that there would be some evidence somewhere, but no, there's nothing. And so, and then you had this sort of weird debate, and all these academics coming through saying, well, assuming that the only purpose of the legislation is to deter people from offending, right. And then they'd say, well, somebody in the heat of the moment doesn't care what the penalties are, therefore this is crazy. But that's not the purpose of the legislation. The purpose of the legislation is to keep our worst, dangerous, violent offenders out of circulation for longer, so that they can't create new victims. That's their primary purpose, and it manifestly works because they're in prison. And we're not talking about, we're talking about 23 people, 25 people that have had 3 strikes. These are not, your run-of-the-mill people who have made a mistake or two. And so we're going to bring that back. So
you are going to bring that back?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go through the process again.
Use
all the bureaucrats' time.
Well, we don't have to take so much time because they repealed
it. Back on the
shelf. There are a couple of tweaks that we want to make because you've got to learn from experience, and one of the good arguments that was put forward is if you never have any benefit for pleading guilty, then that just encourages people to drag things out for long. And from a pragmatic point of view of trying to get the courts working efficiently, I think there should always be some benefit for pleading guilty. So that's one element of it that I think we should look at. But yeah, I mean that 3 strikes fits in, with, like I say, our 3 core priorities around public safety, around violent crime. And that's a key part of it because it's at the apex of the system, but it's sending a very clear message that society is concerned about these things. And we're out door knocking every weekend. We've got candidates up and down the country, knocking on thousands of doors, and there are two issues that come up consistently: cost of living and law and order. People are worried about it.
Yeah.
They can see what's going on, and they're worried, and they want to have a more effective response.
Now, one thing that you said before, which I think was very interesting, and I don't hear a lot of politicians do it, but I personally believe it's a really important sign of development of our political system, is that you said acknowledging the things that may have not been done so well in the past.
Sure.
Is there anything that stands out for you in the history of the National Party, or even perhaps in more recent times, that the party has not done so well, that you think, oh, if we could do that again, we'd do it a little bit differently? Let that knock around in your brain.
Look, I mean, designing appropriate targets you got to have the public sector and the public system needs to have a clear sense of what it's trying to achieve, and ways to measure progress. And so the previous government, in the health sector, for example, had a very clear target around immunisation rates and ED waiting times and so forth. Now, you can argue, there might be other things that are equally important, but if the system is focused on, well, how do we make sure that people get a timely treatment in an emergency department or waiting for a specialist, then that works pretty well. But designing those targets is critical. I think we got most of them right. We didn't get all of them right. For example, if you think of the education side, whereas you're wanting to get a certain percentage of people getting NCA level 2, that's a nice target, but you got to be very careful that doesn't just lead to sort of the watering down of the standards in order to get there. And so I don't think that was quite perfect. And so those are the sorts of things that you've got to think very carefully about, because you always got to be aware of the unintended consequences of whatever you do. So is that, I mean, I don't think we tackled the whole sort of truancy sort of issue as well as we could have. It's been sort of getting steadily worse. It's got a lot worse over the last 6 years. But, I think we could. There's lots of areas where we could do better, and that's the real challenge around politics, is that it's not a game of perfection, and it's not an area where the job will be completed. It never will be completed, because there's always something that needs further work.
Don't you think that that's arguably more an endearing position to take than a politician always saying, no, I'm 100% correct all of the time?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you've got it. Well, people respond to confidence. That they want to look at the politicians and see that they're confident, they know what they're doing.
Yeah,
that's important. But the reality is that you've got to have a bit of humility around you as well, because I mean, all these issues are complex, and you've got to acknowledge that you'll get most of it right, but you won't get everything right, and that's why every piece of legislation should be reviewed regularly, and should take stock, because
Do you remember the one time we had the most biggest disagreement in terms of an approach?
No, but I'm sure there was probably a few.
Yes, but the one.
Which one did you have in mind?
Well, yes, there were a few. No, but this one stands out because I was adamant that we shouldn't do this approach, and you said no, we should do it, and then we went, and you were 100% correct. And I was 100%
Thank goodness for that.
incorrect, which was in relation to the Takata airbags. So those Japanese airbags,
Yes.
and they flooded the consumer protection website, and then so the alerts went out, and then the whole website crumbled, and then the response was from officials, "Oh, we weren't expecting that," and then my approach was, "Well, don't say that that's necessarily their fault," and you said it is their fault.
No.
And
Funnily enough, I can't remember that at all. That's just erased from my memory.
I remember advocating, and I didn't often go into bat for officials, but I was like, I don't know if...
Well, if you're going to have a website, it's got to work.
It was one of the funniest moments, and I sat there, and then all the media that came out after that, I remember there was lots of articles about the poor way in which the website didn't work, and everyone was like, the comments were always like, but Paul Goldsmith said, no, it's not acceptable, so I expect officials to rectify it. And I thought, right, well, I was gazumped here.
Well, you can get away with that for a little while. It always strikes me as funny. Old, Kelvin Davis has been Minister of Corrections for 6 years, and whenever there's sort of kids up on the roof getting KFC to come off the roof, he sort of implies he's kind of this bystander. He says, "Yes, this is terrible. It's not good enough. We should do better." What happened to ministerial accountability? So there is you can do that once or twice, but you can't keep on doing it for 6 years, ultimately, because the minister is ultimately responsible for the overall performance of an organisation. So I wouldn't say it's a hard and fast rule.
Now, one of the things I saw is that your team now has got you making TikToks. Is that correct?
Yes.
Talk me through that.
Well, look, I don't claim any expertise in that particular area. My daughter was a successful TikToker for a while, and I appeared in a few of those back in the early days.
What was she doing? Was she doing those?
Dancing all over the place.
Oh, cool.
But one of my daughters. But, it's just another channel. You've got to get your message out to different groups. Not everybody watches the telly. Not everybody gets the paper. Not everybody listens into the wireless. Some people get their news from TikTok. And so we've got to do a few little videos here and a few there. And some of them go very well. Yeah. I mean, there's been hundreds of thousands seeing some, mind you, less about politics and more about playing cricket in the hallway. It's usually the stuff that's not related to politics that goes well. Anyway, I don't know why that is.
And you do quite a lot of short videos on Instagram.
Oh, do I? Okay.
Well, I seem to see every third video as Paul Goldsmith.
Well, I do. All I know is I do videos, and they go out into various places. I've got a young guy that sort of handles it for me, and he does a good job. Do you ever get hate? Yes. Yeah. Lots of hate.
Yeah, lots of it. What kind
it doesn't pay to look at the comments.
No. What kind of stuff comes through?
Well, I don't really look at it, but every now and again I sort of just have a little peek, and it reminds me not to look at it.
Yeah.
I heard the Radio New Zealand this morning. There was a school principal saying that people say nasty things to them. Well, you should try politics. Yes, but I don't know what some people are very strange. They just go at it hammer and tongs.
Do you think it's getting worse?
Well, I don't know. It's probably always been that way. It's just although a lot of the comments that you would see on social media, the sorts of comments that people would have just said to whoever was in the room beside them in the past, and now they put it up, and so it gets a wider audience, as it were. What
do you think about this idea that they're happy to say it online, but not happy to say it in person?
Yeah, well, that's true in the sense that I you still don't often get direct abuse on the street or in rooms and things like that. It's very rare, which is a good thing. You get people disagreeing with you, which is fine, but you don't tend to get too many people shouting at you, although it occasionally does. We were waving placards last weekend, and somebody tossed their iced drink at me, but they missed by miles. But that was a new low, I thought.
You know that's happened to me.
All right. Have you been hit or not?
No. It went flying past. It was a McDonald's drink, but that was like in 2014.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah.
These people need to work on their aim. They need some cricket practice. One of the things that I have to ask you about is what I feel is one of the biggest own goals that I have seen National do in a very, very long time. And as somebody with whakapapa, I take whakapapa extremely seriously, which was one of your colleagues saying that you had whakapapa Māori.
Oh, that was 3 years ago.
I know, but it was very odd series of events. And as someone who worked for you and absolutely know that you've never claimed whakapapa, you know, I always knew about the background of your whānau. You shared it with me and I was quite aware. But then to have one of your colleagues at the time...
Well, they just got confused, that was all. They just got confused. Because my great-great-granddaddy, Charles Goldsmith, came out to the East Coast in the 1840s, and he was an enthusiastic chap, and he had European wives, and he had Maori wives, and lots of kids. And so I come from the European line, so we've got lots of extended family who are Māori from Ngāti Porou, and so in the sort of translation it got confused, and so that was did create some slapstick themes, and created a lot of entertainment for some, but probably wasn't helpful.
Not at all. What were you?
It's amazing how many people still remember.
Yes, because the thing I found is it's like the person whose whakapapa it is, allegedly,
yes,
was not even the person making the statement, right?
No.
So you're therefore then thrust in a situation which you never even put yourself in. What were you thinking at the time?
The only thing I was thinking was of Donald Trump and Pocahontas. You remember Pocahontas? And so I just had to be very clear. That's not me making any claims. Elizabeth Warren, I think, is Pocahontas.
Yeah, what you said to camera right at the time was like, no, that's not correct. And then I thought, well, that's quite clear. But there were numerous news cycles that came out of that. Is there anything else that happens, you know, that you see within politics that take up much more news cycle time than you think should happen?
Well, yes. I mean, there is an element of, the old saying is that politics is showbiz for ugly people. But which again is very unkind. But there's an element of it. Don't worry.
I've never.
But there is an element of showbiz, and so there's people creating entertainment out of politics, and so there's always going to be a focus on the entertaining side of things rather than hard policy.
I love politics, though.
Well, you do, but not everybody does.
Yeah, true.
I have a colleague who was down in Porirua Market a couple of weekends ago, and she was berated by a group of people saying, you guys have made a complete mess of the country. We need to change the government. We need Labour in to fix this all up. And they'd completely missed the fact that Labour had been in power for 6 years and thought we were still in government. So most people don't pay much attention.
Yeah.
You got to remember that.
Yes, true. I still can't. My brain has gone blank now with that saying. I think that's one of the best sayings I've never heard. Looking ahead, what are the things that you want to see happen for our country, over the short and long period?
Well, I think Chris Luxon talks about getting our mojo back, and I think that's fundamentally it. I think under in the John Key era we were more upbeat, aspirational, confident, outward looking, engaging with the world and ready to take on the world and feeling good about ourselves. And I feel like we've lost that in the last 6 years. We've become much more introspective, much more it's us versus them, and it's and quite sort of negative. and not really, everywhere you look, whether it's in education, it's ambition is not really talked about. It's all it's just it's a great sort of blob, and so the most important thing is to reclaim that sense of hope and aspiration and desire to do well and confidence that we can do well as a country, and to reward hard work, and then also to deal with some of the many challenges that we face, whether it's in law and order or education and health. And so that's what I think we can do. And my goal in politics is always to be a minister in a government that makes a real difference to people's lives, and it's in power where we can feel good as a country. And we've got 4 kids. We want them to not feel like they're making some kind of lifestyle choice to stay in this country, but that they want to stay in this country because they feel like they can achieve their hopes and dreams and do well for them and their family. And that's what it's all about.
Do you think that we should have a regulatory reform minister again?
Yeah. Well,
as the former
regulatory restraint is an important theme, because in politics every week somebody will come along with some bright idea of some new law to ban something in order to fix some problem, and the 9 times out of 10 you just got to say no. No, we're not going to do that, because it just creates problems.
I still think that was one of the most enjoyable portfolios.
Yes, well, it probably cause you least problems, that's why.
Did you read some of those results? They were very problematic. Now, looking across on the other side of the house, is there any policies or ideas that are coming out from the other side of the house, given that National is, centre-right and Labour's centre-left, that you think there's some merit to that idea?
No.
Answer faster. Not at all? Nothing?
Well, I suppose there's 1 or 2 things. I mean, there's probably, there's quite a fair bit of legislation that we end up supporting at the first reading, at least, to go to select committee and have a look at. There's the various things that Ginny Anderson's brought through in relation to, extra powers for police to deal with gangs and so forth that we support. We think they could have got onto it earlier and gone further in various parts. But there's bits and pieces that they've done.
Yeah. Who on the other side of the house do you have a really good relationship with?
We sit in select committees. I'm on for Justice. Venushi Walters is the chair. We get on fine. And Camilla Bellich has been on the education one with us, and we get on fine. There's a reasonable collegiality at the select committee level, mostly. I remember when I first came in and was chair of the finance committee, the opposition weren't particularly collegial.
What did they do?
They were savage. Clayton Cosgrove and those guys. It was you were fighting for your life. But maybe we're too soft. I don't know.
No, well, that's good to hear, because I think that often people see the cut and thrust of the house and think that you guys will go around Parliament.
Yeah. No. Half the time. We agree on stuff, but there's obviously huge areas of disagreement, and most people in Parliament are friendly. Some aren't.
Like any workplace.
I wouldn't name names, but there's the odd person that you walk past who will hiss.
Really?
Yes.
Hiss. And not in an endearing manner.
Not in an endearing way.
Oh my God.
But that's the thing about you got to do. You spend a little bit of time. Sometimes and occasionally there will be I used to play on the parliamentary rugby side until I got a bit old, and that was very useful because you just spend a bit of time socially with them, and you realise that they don't actually have horns coming out of their head, and they're kind of normal people in some respects, and so it's important.
Now, if we're thinking about that phrase, normal people, we've got lives outside of politics, all of those kind of things. What's one thing that people do not know about you, Mr. Goldsmith, that you think that they should know about you?
I don't know. Do they really care?
I care, not the host.
I'm just a struggler. Well, I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, you know, my background was in writing, and that's the thing I'll get back to when I come a cropper at some point. I'll get back to writing histories and books. I love doing that. But the thing that I enjoy when I'm not doing politics and other things at the moment is tennis. Love tennis.
Really?
Yep. Playing a bit of tennis.
Have you always played tennis?
Or
did you just pick it up recently?
No, well, you know, growing up, I played tennis, a lot of tennis, and then for about 20 years I didn't play much, and then my eldest son got to the point where he was playing, and so I started playing again, and now he beats me, which is very irritating. But in the interim, I watched a lot of tennis. Yeah. And amazingly, I was so much better when I got back into it, because I'd watched what the good players do and figured out actually what to do. So yeah, I love. So sometimes I'll just go at night, go to sleep dreaming of my backhand. So that's I'm obsessed with it.
Have you ever been to Wimbledon or anything like that?
No, I went to the Aussie Open once.
Yeah,
I'd love to go to Wimbledon. It's definitely on the to-do list.
And then in terms of, I don't know much about tennis at all. What is your swing of choice? I don't know, is that what you call it?
Swing of choice.
I don't know what you call it.
Well, no. Well, it's
because there's that.
Well, yes, there is a serve, and then there's a forehand, and then there's a backhand. Yeah. You got to do all three.
Are there which one of those is your best, do you think? And should I verify this with your son to make sure that you're telling us the truth?
Sort of one time out of 20, I'll pull off a very nice Roger Federer style backhand, topspin backhand, but the other 19 times it won't work.
Oh my gosh, very good, very good. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up shortly, and one thing we always do before we end is the bowl of bravery.
Oh.
Which has got questions in here. You have to choose a question.
Right.
And then answer it.
Right.
But before we...
Bowl of bravery.
Yes, that's all right. Before we finish, is there anything in particular that you want to put on the record that we haven't got to today that you think we're really good for our listeners to know?
Well, look, I mean, only that, we're getting down to the business end of things. We've got 2 months to go, every election you'll hear politicians saying, "Oh, this is the most important election that we've faced in a very long time." That's standard, but this time it's actually true. This is absolutely critical, I think, to the direction of the country. I think we're heading in the wrong direction, and it's very important to change. And that's why we're very motivated. The tagline says "Get New Zealand back on track," but it's about, I think, like I say, restoring that ambition and hope and aspiration for our country. So we think it's important.
Awesome. Okay, you ready for the bowl of bravery? All right.
What do we got? What was the last movie you went to watch? What did you think of it?
There we go.
Oppenheimer.
Oh yes. Okay.
I went with my wife. And it's 3 hours.
3 hours?
It was 3 hours. And it was a Friday night, and it started at 8 o'clock. And I watched it, loved it. My wife fell asleep after half an hour.
Yes.
And I woke her up for the explosion. Then she went back to sleep. So it was good, but long. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. What is the plot line? Somebody blowing up things or something?
No, Oppenheimer was the scientist who led the development of the atom bomb.
Okay.
And so in Los Alamos in America, and so it's a biopic on his life and the development of it all. So and then he got caught up in the McCarthyist anti-communist scare in the 50s, and so it's sort of going backwards and forwards between his kind of troubles in the 50s as an alleged spy and the whole development. It's a good story. But it's reasonably complicated. So it's best not to start at 8 o'clock on a Friday night.
Or fall asleep.
Yeah.
amazing. It has been an absolute pleasure to be able to have this time with you. Thank you so much. If anyone wants to reach out to you, where's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Probably by email.
By email?
paul.goldsmith@parliament.govt.nz.
Not that Instagram or TikTok?
Well, possibly, but I don't know if I'd find it.
And especially not if you're sending abuse. So, no, thank you so much for your time, and good luck for the rest of the campaign.
Yep.
I know that you've got your sign written mini, is it?
Yes.
So
Electric.
Electric?
Yes.
So it'll be around the electorate more and more, I assume.
Yes.
Awesome. So best of luck.
Thank you.
And I hope that we'll be able to get you back on the podcast maybe in 12 months' time, and we can share some more.
Talk all about my ministerial responsibilities.
Oh, there we go. I love that. And on that note, I think that's the best way to end the podcast. Remember to like and subscribe and share with everyone. We've got a whole bunch of episodes already recorded, and then a whole lot more coming up to keep you up to date with the people behind the politics for election 2023. And as always, have an amazing rest of your week, and I'll see you on the next one. Ka kite!